Islam will continue to be triumphant until there have been 12 khulafa, all of them from Al-Quraysh.
The God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever.
This is my brother, my executor, and my successor among you, so listen to him and obey.
My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting.
Whoso obeys me obeys God. Whoever disobeys me disobeys God. Whoever disobeys my commander disobeys me.
The Lord said to me, You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession.
Two systems of government, two visions for life on earth. Whichever is true changes everything. This is Christ and Khulafa.
Welcome back to Christ and Caliphate. Today we are going to talk about the riots in Sweden over the burning of the Qur'an. So, does anybody want to tell us what happened?
So there's a guy in Sweden who keeps threatening to burn the Quran, and every time he does, there's an international incident, and Muslim countries threaten to cut off diplomatic relations with Sweden. There's protests outside of the Swedish embassy in various countries, and the guy finally did it.
Okay.
So then this led to riots and protests in Sweden, cars being burned, things being thrown, the police being under attack by protesters, and everything's been going crazy.
Okay.
So one thing I found out about this that was a interesting part of the dynamic here is this is very much talked about as an East versus West thing. This is the sort of the secular West versus the Muslim East kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I read the guy's name and I looked into his backstory, the dude's Iraqi.
Right.
He's not like a Swedish guy.
Right.
He called himself a Swedish guy now, but he's an Iraqi refugee that got to Sweden in 2018, and he's the one stirring all this trouble.
Right. Which makes it much more interesting as far as the story goes. Like, he's a unlikely actor in all of this.
And the thing about it, for me, that makes it interesting is it just makes the whole situation all that more complicated. Because on the one hand, I can see why Sweden would want to say to its own citizens, people who've grown up there, we don't want antagonistic relationships between Sweden and the Muslim world, so please don't do this. But when this person who's really causing the trouble is an Iraqi refugee himself, it kind of becomes a layer more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's interesting that, you know, in what the articles I was reading, that his like social media footprint only begins when he enters Sweden. So for the rest of the time, he just, you know, doesn't have a Facebook, doesn't have an Instagram, isn't espousing his beliefs anywhere. He gets to Sweden and takes advantage of this idea of free speech that he didn't have in his native country, and comes and, you know, says, well, I'm just expressing myself, right? I'm just expressing my views. And I think it's a really interesting dynamic, because from what I read, he had to apply for a permit to do what he did.
That's what I read too.
Right. And then he fought in court for the right to do what he did, and it was granted to him by the court. It was permitted. The local government tried to shut it down, but then they gave him the permission to go ahead and have this, you know, thing that, you know, we're looking at it and saying, well, what is it? It's a protest to him, right? Mm-hmm. He's protesting something, and apparently he's protesting the fact that he's not allowed to become a Swedish citizen or something like that. So I think it's really interesting to have this guy do that. And then what I found even more interesting was in another article, they said that the immediate take was that he was a member of an ultra-nationalist Swedish political party. That made, and I think that's like a thing that the media does, right? So whenever something happens, it's like, it must be this group, that we don't like, right? And then they automatically want to slap a label on it. But that's too easy of a story.
What was it? A Iraqi or Iran National Party and a Christian party? Or like these were all the words that were floating in all the parties that he was associated with.
Yeah. So there's so many complicated layers to it. So the news has say he was aligned with, they call him an Iraqi Christian who was aligned with a pro-Iranian militia group and was like a commander in it back in Iraq.
And a Christian militia group.
I didn't see Christian militia group.
So I thought that I read that, yeah.
I mean, it could very well be in there.
No, he said he was the leader of a Christian militia group. So that's like the part that's got me all twisted up. And then later on, he identifies as an atheist.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's what's interesting here.
Bro is a spy.
Yeah.
That's what bro is. Bro is a spy.
But
bro actually works for the Russians.
But it's interesting how people want to fit someone like this into some sort of existing narrative.
Right.
So the Muslim world wants to make him a sort of Western Islamophobe.
Right.
And then the European media wants to make him an ultra-right sort of Christian nationalist, and they emphasize that.
Right.
And it's only once you actually sort of like read a little lower that you'll see he identifies as an atheist.
Right.
And I actually went and found his YouTube channel. It's all in Arabic, but with translation. The way he introduced...
I didn't see his YouTube channel. That's interesting.
Yeah, the way he introduced himself is he says, I am an atheist free thinker who questions established norms and pushes back against anything and doesn't believe everything I'm told and likes to question things. And I am Swedish by nature, not Iraqi by nature.
Even though he didn't get granted Swedish.
Yeah, it's his Swedish by nature is probably what undid Swedish. His quest for Swedish citizenship.
Yeah. I actually love this idea. I love that there's someone in the Middle East somewhere growing up in like a village or town in Iraq whose like instinct is like,
I identify as Swedish.
Yeah. This is like idealized Sweden for whatever reason.
Right.
I wonder if like this taking advantage of Sweden's like free speech. I wonder if he would have, if he specifically was like, no, I could only do this in Sweden, or if he could have been like, I could do this in France or any other European country. I wonder if that's a component.
Question. You certainly couldn't.
I have no idea. Yeah.
In like, a more, let's just say, less hardline country like Turkey or something like that. I think you would have had a very similar response. A very, very kind of angry response by the government. And it's really interesting because, not every government guarantees free speech.
Right.
Right. Like that's a hallmark of the United States. Apparently, in Sweden, you have some of these rights. You don't actually have them in Canada. You don't have them in other countries. You're British, like
You kind of have
right?
it.
Well, actually, it got better a few years ago in England. Actually, so there was this law that was there's this very nebulous. You could get like criminal penalties for insulting somebody,
right?
And there was this massive celebrity-led campaign between Christians and atheists and everybody.
Really,
nobody
liked it.
Magneto, the X-Men, everybody teamed up,
right?
And there was this campaign that says, "Feel free to insult me,"
right?
And they all talked about the importance of this,
right?
And the law got
overturned. Weird.
I mean, how did Monty Python survive so long?
Well, that was before that law came.
Right. But I'm saying, right in the under that law.
Yeah. No, Monty Python defeated that law.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, there's definitely only a certain place in the world you could do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's a reasoning behind what he's doing that appears logical to him, why he would do it. But, you know, the rest of us are certainly sitting on the outside going, well, you know, is this the best way to get your point across?
Yeah, I agreed. So, I think I can speak for us all. We all think, you know, burning a book to show your anger with the contents of that or dissatisfaction with a certain worldview is a stupid way to communicate your point.
Right. Well, I mean, it's at the very least inarticulate. At the midpoint of that, it's ineffective. You know, I think that it's sensationalistic. Like it's just it comes off as more of an attention grab.
I mean, he's famous. We're talking about him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he got his point across. He wanted to, you know, how many more YouTube followers does he have now? Right. Like how many more social media followers? And I'm sure he's monetized. So there's probably a little bit of that going on too.
What are your opinions on book burnings?
Okay, so mine.
Yeah.
Because you looked at me. So here we go.
Your
Yes.
collective.
Your collective. I think they're ridiculous. I kind of put them in the classification of boycotts, right? So here in the States, actually I was talking to my wife the other day, and she works with someone who is, you know, in academia, and that person like forbids his spouse to buy anything at Hobby Lobby. Right? You're not allowed to go shopping at Hobby Lobby because, you know, they don't reflect our values, right?
Wife, Hobby Lobby reflects the patriarchy, and I forbid you from shopping.
right. Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. Haymaker, back. But the thing we started talking about was boycotts, right? They boycotted Target. It didn't work. Right? They boycott, you know, Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby is doing just fine.
Chick-fil-A.
They boycotted Chick-fil-A, and it exploded. We have a Chick-fil-A in North Seattle now. I never thought that would happen.
Right.
But there it is, right?
Yeah, I'd never heard of Chick-fil-A before the boycott.
Yeah, okay. right. I remember when they first started boycotting, I was in New Jersey, and they had opened a Chick-fil-A by our house. And, you know, there was a big push for people to go and support Chick-fil-A. And Chick-fil-A is like, the food, you know, you get in, you're in line for like 5 minutes, you get the food, you know, they're on top of things. And this line was all the way down the street, you know. So the point I'm coming to is boycotts they have limited like efficacy, right?
Like maybe now people are going to be like, I'm going to read the Qur'an even harder.
Well,
and I've never read the Qur'an.
As like a book
to
burning, if you're going to put it in that classification, right, as something that I'm going to isolate and try and punish, right? Has it ever really worked? I don't think it's ever really worked. I've never seen...
the Nazis tried pretty hard to burn books in Germany.
And the Nazis did everything. I mean, they changed the frequency of music.
Yeah.
Right? They changed it from 440 hertz to, you know, whatever it is, because they just thought, like, we're better and we're going to do that.
So by contrast, actually, to the Nazi book burnings, Winston Churchill said that everyone in England
should read
Mein Kampf.
Right. And I think...
that's probably the right attitude.
For me, the main reason why these things don't work is because the ideas never go away. Right? Like, if you take a book and you ban it or whatever, you know, or you burn it or you single it out, the ideas just come again in another packaging. You know, the people who believe those ideas are just going to come back with another way to express them. Right? Or, you know, let's just say it stays dormant for a while, but there's nothing new under the sun. Right? The Bible says that there's nothing new. The book of Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. a lot of the forms of government that you see people like grappling with in the like, let's just call it the postmodern era, all find their origins in other societies, right? It's just somebody took these ideas and made them into something else, right? Made them into something more modern, put it in a different packaging, and then added their own ideas to it. So you can never escape that. And banning a book or burning a book or trying to take an idea and single it out. I mean, if that was true, anti-Semitism would not exist, right? If that was true, racism would not exist.
Right.
But these things are there, and they're never going to go away because we're living in a fallen world.
So, counterpoint on the book burning thing. There, to play devil's advocate here, there's a moment in the book of Acts, in Ephesus, I believe, where people become Christians, and then they burn all their magic books.
Yeah.
How do we square that with...
Okay, but
There's
is
still magic
is
books out there.
Okay, so if we're talking about a moment, right, where
Or
a
what do you
person
mean? I guess what was the goal is with that?
is divorcing themselves from something. Okay. I'm not trying to get you to I'm not trying to get you to do a behavior, right? I'm trying to get me to stop doing a behavior. Is very different.
Right.
Okay, so that me like shedding that thing from my own self.
Like their allegiance.
Yeah, it's like I want to sever my ties with it, and I feel so strongly about it that I'm gonna burn it. I don't think that's what this guy was doing, right? I don't think that he was like ever really. It doesn't seem like he was seriously steeped in Islam at any point in his adult life. And
who knows?
Yeah. I don't know.
Well, I think that probably the piece here where the media is jumping, and Gio suggested that his name doesn't sound like a Muslim name, so he's probably raised Christian in Iraq, was part of like a Christian minority there, and is an atheist on top of that. So the European media may not be entirely deceptive by calling him an Iraqi Christian, because Christian as opposed to grew up Sunni or Shia.
Right.
In those categories, it makes sense, yeah.
I mean, we sit in coffee shops here and we talk to Muslims who, are not Muslims all the time, right? Didn't we have a conversation with a Turkish fellow, like an academic, and he was like, I'm an atheist. Very clear, like, there's nothing hostile about it. He's I'm an atheist, I believe in science, and we had a great conversation about that.
Well, I guess burning books is one thing, but what about your opinion on rioting in response to not books but blasphemy?
I think it's bad, and I also think it's dumb. Here's why.
Okay.
Remind me this guy's name.
Salwan Momika.
Salwan Momika.
Yeah.
Salwan Momika.
Salwan Momika, right.
Yeah.
We know his name now.
Yeah.
Named I can also list off Salman Rushdie.
Right. That's an immediate parallel.
Yeah, Charlie Hebdo, right? Charlie Hebdo.
Right.
The only reason I know any of these people's names is because of the massive backlash it causes.
Right.
Like, the reason these things happen are not despite the backlash, they're because of the backlash. Riling people up is fun. And as long as people get riled up, people will continue to do these things for the express purpose of riling people up.
Right.
So it doesn't... If somebody burns a Qur'an in the forest and no one's there to see it, does it even happen?
Right. No.
It is the question. So the Muslim reactions to these things, well, I certainly see some nobility in the zeal. It's a strategic blunder because it just blows these people up, not literally.
Okay, but I think that's what he wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
He wants that. Yeah,
exactly.
He's counting on the chaos.
Yes.
What does the Quran say about burning the Quran?
Doesn't say
or
anything
being or blasphemy in general.
The Quran itself doesn't really
address it.
Well, firstly, because the Quran is not a written text at the time the Quran's written, and actually the first person we know in history to burn the Quran was the Caliph Uthman, who burned all the variant manuscripts
Right.
and to
Right.
publish the official one.
Right.
So at that point in Islamic history, it's not seen as some blasphemous thing to burn the text. In fact, even in Judaism, when a Torah is done, don't they burn it or do they bury it?
Yeah.
When a Torah is done?
Yeah, if a Torah is old and worn out,
Oh.
rather than letting it rot, they burn it.
Yeah, or
Oh.
bury it.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
it
did not know
depends
that.
on the stream of Judaism. People burn Bibles all the time, right? People throughout time have burned Bibles. They burn holy texts from other religions. I think that you have to look at the audience, no matter what. If you were in Iran and you burned a Quran, you can expect, a whirlwind of chaos. But if you were in Kansas, it wouldn't be as much of a blip, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't know, someplace less populated. You just kind of brought that analogy up. But, I think, like, if you're trying to elicit a response, right? If you're trying to be sensationalist, if you're trying to drive a wedge, in a society, go after that society's values. Take their sacred cow and destroy it, or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and use it against them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's funny you said that. Well, no, I don't want to interrupt your thought, but that just made me think of all the idol burnings found in the Bible and made me have more questions. But what were you going to say?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great point to address because, for sure, we see the burning of pagan idols in the Bible in the land of Israel, which the Israelites, it was their territory. They weren't going to, say, Syria and burning the Syrian idols to show this.
Unless they were conquering
Even then,
a land.
They didn't conquer
They
Syria.
didn't conquer Syria.
No, not Syria, but for Canaan, and
sure.
another.
Sure.
But yeah.
But that was this is becoming your land.
Right,
Cleanse
right.
everything out of it.
Still, mm-hmm,
So,
right.
like, it's not.
Yeah, it's not go in and offend the Canaanites.
Right, or like the
It's,
Egyptians or something, yeah.
Agree with it or not. It's like, get rid of these things because I, the Lord your God, don't want you to follow them.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's very different.
It's cleansed the land completely. In the same way, like, should we tolerate blasphemy in our own lives and our own households? Like, absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we want to have the utmost respect for God and the things of God in our life, and we
Land.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean we haven't been given control of, like, non-Christians. And I actually think that
Mm-hmm.
I think that the Muslim world is missing an opportunity right now, because if you look at this guy, he grew up as a Christian minority, was an atheist in Iraq, and think about everything Iraq has gone through in the last
20 years.
20 years, 30 years, 40 years.
That's actually more like 50 now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think about everything from the establishment of Iraq to Saddam Hussein,
Right.
and the things you'd go through there as a Christian minority and then an atheist who doesn't believe in anything.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like, I can absolutely understand why someone like that would be bitter.
Sure.
There's things to be bitter about
Mm-hmm.
growing up as a modern Iraqi, and when the Muslim world reacts with "How dare you do this?" before they think, okay, well, if what they think is that he's misrepresenting Islam. Well, maybe the first thing they should be thinking about, okay, if it's true that he believes in misrepresentation of Islam, maybe the first step should be representing it properly to him.
Mm.
But instead, well, what's happening? Fire is being set, rocks being thrown.
Right.
It's all going to keep feeding into the same cycle.
I mean, I think if you were in his position and you were intentionally trying to offend Muslims and elicit a response, the response he's trying to elicit is, I want people to destroy cities, destroy property, take lives, whatever, in the name of Islam, because he's got beef with the religion, But to your earlier point, I think the thing that I I have thought about in regards to like a place like Iraq, right? They've just never gotten a fair shake. They didn't get a fair shake from, you know, a society dominated by religion, and they didn't get a fair shake in a secular society, right?
Mhm.
They just have never gotten a fair shake. And I could, like, you know, see a person. I'm not
Empathize.
condoning this, right? I'm just saying I could see people doing things out of sheer disgust, right? I'm disgusted by the religious people. I'm disgusted by the secular people. None of them have an answer to any of our problems. None of them have an answer to, you know, the suffering that, you know, I've been through, right? The oppression I felt, all this other stuff, which leads to a different point, right? What is the answer for them? You know, how do you find an answer for that person? You and I did a podcast like a few years back on the fall of Afghanistan and the government there. What was this guy's name? Can't remember.
Ashraf Ghani.
Ashraf Ghani, right? We read his book and we reviewed his book, Fixing Failed States. I remember the title. I just... but what ultimately is the answer? You know what I mean? For a group of people that, you know, also like Afghanis like that, have never had a fair shake. Not for generations.
I think in that episode, you touched on a biblical worldview response. So, shall we get into how Christians should respond to criticism and maybe things like this? Burning of Bibles or whatever it may be.
So I think, you know, first of all, as far as the critiquing other ideas, in Acts 18, Paul and Barnabas are in Ephesus, and the people from the Ephesian religion start a riot against Paul and Barnabas. And the town clerk comes out, and he says, "You've brought these men here who are neither sacrilegious nor blasphemers of our goddess." So Paul and Barnabas have been saying, gods that are made with hands are not gods. They've been saying that openly. But what they haven't been doing is insulting the Ephesian religion needlessly.
Yeah.
So,
because stating your opposition to a religion doesn't have to be rude or disrespectful necessarily.
Right. And now some people will take it that way.
Yeah.
But there's a difference. There's a difference between having a balanced, thoughtful critique of Islam, which we have, versus hating Muslims, versus
burning books,
versus mocking Muhammad. Like my preferred way is to, if I'm going to critique Muhammad, I'm going to talk about him as if I'm criticizing somebody's beloved uncle. That I'm going to be careful and thoughtful with my tone for the sake of the person I'm talking to, because I love the person I'm talking to. I'm not trying to piss people off for fun.
Because what did it say? They're not sacrilegious and they're not what did it say?
Blasphemers of our goddess.
Blasphemers. I don't know what those definitions would actually mean, but
so it's going to vary from culture to culture. But what we do know is they haven't done anything unnecessarily insulting. So, like, they haven't gone and, like...
Yeah, it can't be overly insulting to say, I don't believe in your God.
Yeah.
It just, you know, even in the midst of a temple, to say, I don't believe in your God, I believe in this other God. It's Acts 19, and that's what happened.
So they haven't been going into temples and, like, knocking things over or, you know, urinating on statues or anything like that.
Right. Well, I mean, here's the thing, right? I think that as Christians, we can find partners to discuss these things with. And there are plenty of Muslims who are open to it. There are scholars who will talk to you, you know, Muslim scholars. Like, was it Jordan Peterson? Put this really interesting discussion between a Christian pastor himself as a psychologist and a scholar, Islamic scholar, and they went back and forth. I think you can have those discussions, and I don't think that the scholar would look at them and say, you know, you're committing blasphemy.
And they would align with how people like Acts or in the New Testament would express their freedom of speech, whether or not they had it in the places that they were going. Like, they would mainly talk and preach, and
I don't think freedom of speech is a Roman value.
No, it is. It is. The Emperor Titus, who was the emperor when Jesus was crucified, said, in a free state, the mind and the tongue must also be free.
Well, look at that.
There you go.
Yeah, no, that's good. So
it varied from emperor to emperor for sure, but in the Roman culture,
right,
there was certainly by some people the value that people should be able to express and say what they really think.
Right.
That's good.
Right. Just not always played out.
Yeah.
Right. You can talk about I guess this is the.
I mean, yeah, these guys died.
You can say whatever you want about whatever you want, but if you talk about me, I'll kill you.
Yeah.
You can say whatever you want to Titus. You can't say whatever you want to Nero.
Right. So it's a discrepancy. But yeah, I feel like the hardest part for us as believers is to actually have the courage to go find those people that we can talk to.
So, okay, to go back to Sophia's question on the other side, someone like Andrew Tate is going to say, if you look at the way people talk about religion, whenever Muslims' sources are insulted, Muslims protest and they rise up and they show strength. But whenever people insult Jesus or the Bible, Christians do nothing. Clearly, Islam is the right religion.
Right.
He said that?
Yeah.
I mean, the hard part in trying to communicate with an Andrew Tate, right, is communicating with an Andrew Tate, right? Like, but my reminder to him would be, okay, someone came into the garden and threatened to kill Jesus, and Peter takes a sword out and chops the guy's ear off, right? Jesus having the power within himself to just slay everybody, right? Do anything. He could teleport it. I don't know, right? Like, whatever it was to get out of it, reaches down, looks at the soldier's ear, reaches down and reattaches it, heals it on the spot, right? And says, permit even this. And that goes back to the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus says, when you're offended, turn the other cheek, right? If someone forces you to carry their pack, carry it, for 1 mile, carry it for 2, right? The essence of Christianity and the response to these things is to be rooted in humility, right? We're called to be humble.
Because we don't avenge ourselves.
Well, I mean, the point is, you and I were having this discussion like the other day in the car, that it's God who fights these battles, right? It's God who's going to sit up and he's going to use situations like what happened to Paul or situations like this and give us an opportunity to be able to tell people about this God who wants to respond in humility, right? So if we look at somebody who says, I'm a Christian and I'm going to go burn something, I would say that might be a Christian, but that's not Christian character. It doesn't reflect Jesus. It doesn't reflect anything that Yeshua did. So yeah, I think, the humble route is not often tried.
The high road.
Right.
And the crosses really are model for this, because I think what Muslims see in the cross is weakness.
Right.
Which it isn't. It's surrendering to something and suffering through something bad for the sake of a greater victory.
Right.
That Jesus has clear in his mind the whole way through.
Chess, not checkers.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
So Christian patience is not a case of not being zealous for people
or God.
or God. It's being patient. So we should speak when people do the wrong things and say the wrong things, and we should address those things, and we should warn people that insulting God is not a laughing matter. But it's not our job to go and God is strong enough to avenge himself. Mm-hmm. And we come with an implicit understanding if that God were to get rid of everything that insults him and is offensive to him, none of us would be here.
Absolutely. Yep.
which happened in the flood.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's done that.
I mean, if you were to look back at all of the times too that there have been Christians or believers in the one true God, so you can go back to Judaism, but also all the way to Christianity. What's the testimony? In all of the places where they were surrounded by, blasphemers, right? Surrounded by people who mocked their religion, surrounded by people who oppressed them because of their religion. We're still here, right? We're still here because God's been with us.
So I had one Muslim friend who became Christian, and he was in history class in college at the time. And right as he's starting to learn about Christianity, he's learning about the Vikings, and he says, well, how does Christianity, which doesn't have a sort of martial military spirit about it, how does Christianity deal with people like the Vikings?
Mm-hmm.
So I asked him, how many Christians do you know? He says, quite a lot at this point. How many Vikings do you know? Well, none.
Right. We're still here.
Yeah.
Right? We're still here, and it's not a testimony to us. It's a testimony to our God.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I do, however, think it is possible and common for Christians to have weakness and hide behind the idea of meekness.
Absolutely. And the hardest part in any person's Christian dynamic is this idea of balance, Like I have worked with and been around many people who are like, well, they're gonna, let's just say, the push to promote homosexuality in schools, right? And then it's the Christians that show up, to the meetings. Are they burning the books? No. Are they saying destroy the books? No. Are they saying get rid of the curriculum? Yes, but certain things are left to older people, so maybe expose it to them at a later date. But then you'll see more progressive Christians going, why are you doing that? You're just being a problem. You're giving the rest of Christianity a bad name by going and doing this. But that's the line, right? Did anyone set a school on fire? Did anyone go into a school and start trashing it or take hostages or whatever?
I'm sure you could find something.
I'm sure you could, but the point is that it's like 0.00000.
Yeah.
Whereas Christians are the ones who go to the meetings. They go to the school. They go to the zoning meetings. They go to the school board meetings. They go to the PTA things, and they push back. That's where Christians go, and they fight this idea of wars. And even if they lose, right, which they have been, the idea, you want to say something? I can
Yeah, so the funny thing is I have a Muslim friend on Facebook who keeps complaining about all the sort of moral decay in America and keeps explaining how Islam is the only solution to these things. But every video he posts about this is of some Christian mom somewhere standing up to the system and saying, no, you can't teach this to my children. I'm going to use the full extent of the law to make sure you're restrained from doing this because what you're doing is fundamentally evil.
Right.
There are Muslims that stand up to these things.
Sure.
Glad to have you. But to say that Christianity is weak and not doing anything it's just not true. There's all sorts of Christians across the country who are courageously standing for what is true
via speech and dialogue.
But there's no threats.
There's no,
I mean, we're called as disciples of Jesus to be bold, right? To be bold in truth, not necessarily bold in I'm
fighting.
Gonna go smash windows.
Because we know the amount of force we have behind us is unimaginable.
Right. And
does not need our contribution.
Right. And I think, if you were going to look at the, let's just say American history and go back to the Revolutionary War or something, the reason why those people took those actions, and then formed America were not because of, they're forcing me to read books, right? They were taking their children and, carting them off, you know, and forcing their children to enlist in the military, and you know, taking their livelihood and taking their houses, and you know, kind of taking their wives, and right, like it had crossed the line, you know, and the only answer for them was to overthrow the crown. So, you know, I think that people want to jump all the way to that, right? They want to jump all the way to, well, you know, this country was founded on blood, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
That, well, I think that actually leads to a natural future episode
yeah.
of Christianity and revolutions. Is Christianity always against revolution?
Well,
and
I can't wait
what
to
are the
talk
tools?
about that. That's like, revolutions are
Yeah.
my speciality.
So let's do it. But for now,
Yeah.
we're over time. Thank
Yeah.
you guys for listening, and we will see you next time on Christ and Caliphate.